Close your eyes and imagine this. You're about to hear the most incredible survival story ever discovered. A story so shocking that scientists argued about it for decades. A story about ordinary people who did something extraordinary that saved our entire species. Tonight, you're going to learn secrets that took archaeologists years to figure out. Secrets that could change how you think about survival, warmth, and what humans are really capable of when everything seems hopeless. But here's what makes this even more interesting. The techniques you're about to discover aren't just ancient history. Some of the smartest survival experts today are rediscovering these methods, and they work just as well now as they did 30,000 years ago. So get comfortable, let your mind drift. Because we're about to travel back to the harshest winter in human history. A winter that lasted 3 years. A winter that killed almost everything, except for one small group of people who figured out something incredible. And if you want to learn some of these ancient sleep secrets that actually work in modern life, I've created a special guide that shows you how our ancestors got the deepest, most restful sleep imaginable. You can find that link in the description below. Also, if you love these kinds of deep historical mysteries, make sure to subscribe. We dive into the most fascinating untold stories from our past. Stories that make you think differently about everything. Now let me ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? What time is it where you are? Drop a comment and let me know. I love seeing how this ancient story connects people from all over the world, all at different times of day and night. Chapter 1: The Impossible Winter. The year was approximately 28,000 BCE. Earth was in the grip of the last great ice age. But this wasn't just any winter. This was what scientists now call the Impossible Winter. A 3-year period so cold that it should have wiped out every human being on the planet. Imagine temperatures that made the North Pole look warm. Imagine winds that could freeze your breath before it left your mouth. Imagine snow so deep that it buried entire forests. This wasn't just cold weather. This was nature trying to erase humanity from existence. Most scientists believe that early humans simply couldn't have survived this period. The evidence suggested that the human population dropped to maybe just a few thousand people worldwide. Some researchers thought it dropped even lower, maybe just a few hundred. But here's where it gets controversial. In 1994, archaeologists in southern France made a discovery that changed everything. They found a cave system that had been perfectly preserved under layers of ice and rock for nearly 30,000 years. And what they found inside didn't match anything they expected. They found evidence of not just survival, but thriving human communities during the worst winter in history. They found tools, art, and most shocking of all, they found evidence of survival techniques that were so advanced, so sophisticated, that modern experts couldn't figure out how they worked. The discovery was so controversial that it split the scientific community. Half the experts said it was impossible. The other half said it proved that our ancestors were far more intelligent and resourceful than anyone had imagined. But the most shocking discovery was yet to come, because when they analysed the remains more carefully, they realised something incredible. The people in this cave weren't just surviving the impossible winter. They were comfortable, they were warm, they were well fed, they were living better than many humans would live for thousands of years afterward. How is that possible? How could people with no modern technology, no electricity, no heating systems, no insulated buildings, live comfortably during the harshest climate in human history? The answer involves techniques so ingenious that survival experts today are still trying to fully understand them. Techniques that challenge everything we thought we knew about prehistoric humans. And the most incredible part? The family at the centre of this story weren't experts or leaders or specially trained survivalists. They were just ordinary people. A grandmother named Ayla, her daughter Kira, son-in-law Yorick, and their 7-year-old daughter Zara. But what they discovered during that impossible winter would save not just their lives, but potentially the entire human species. And their techniques were so effective that some of them are being used by modern survival experts today. Are you starting to wonder what they figured out? Good, because their story is about to get even more incredible. Chapter 2: The Discovery That Changed Everything. It started with a mistake. Yorick was hunting during the early days of what would become the impossible winter. He was tracking a wounded mammoth through a blizzard when he got lost. Completely hopelessly lost. For 3 days he wandered through the worst storm anyone in his tribe had ever seen. His food ran out. His fire-making supplies got wet. He should have died. Everyone expected him to die. But on the third night, half frozen and barely conscious, he stumbled into something that shouldn't have existed. A warm cave, not just shelter from the wind, but actually warm air flowing from deep underground. When he crawled inside, he discovered something that would challenge everything scientists thought they knew about prehistoric survival. The cave wasn't just warm, it was part of a vast underground system of interconnected chambers, each one heated by natural hot springs deep beneath the earth. But here's what makes this controversial. The caves showed clear signs of previous human habitation. Not recent habitation, ancient habitation. Someone had been using these caves for thousands of years before Yorick found them. Someone had developed sophisticated systems for channeling the natural heat, storing food, even creating underground water reservoirs. The question that still puzzles scientists today is this: who were these earlier people? How did they discover these techniques? And most mysteriously, where did they go? When Yorick returned to his tribe with news of the caves, most people didn't believe him. Underground heating systems, advanced food storage. It sounded impossible. But Ayla, the tribal grandmother and wisest person in their group, listened carefully to every detail. Ayla had lived through many harsh winters, but she could feel that this one was different. The cold was deeper, more persistent. The snow was heavier. The animals were behaving strangely, migrating earlier and farther than ever before. Her instincts told her that this winter would test them beyond anything they had ever experienced. So she made a decision that many tribal elders thought was crazy. She convinced the entire tribe to abandon their traditional winter shelter and follow Yorick back to these mysterious caves. It was a huge risk. If Yorick was wrong, if the caves weren't as warm as he claimed, if they couldn't find enough food, the entire tribe could die. But Ayla had a feeling that their survival depended on learning whatever secrets these caves held. What they discovered when they reached the caves was beyond anything they had imagined. The underground system was massive. Dozens of interconnected chambers, as large as modern houses, natural hot springs that provided endless warm water, air vents that created perfect circulation, stone formations that channeled heat exactly where it was needed. But the most shocking discovery was the evidence of the previous inhabitants. Tools more advanced than anything they had seen. Art, more sophisticated than what most people associate with prehistoric humans. And most mysteriously, written symbols. Actual writing thousands of years before writing was supposed to have been invented. Who were these people? How did they develop such advanced techniques? And why did they disappear? These are questions that scientists are still debating today. Some believe they've found evidence of a lost civilization. Others think these were just unusually innovative groups of early humans. But everyone agrees on one thing: the techniques they developed were incredibly sophisticated. And Ayla's family was about to learn that mastering these techniques wouldn't just help them survive the impossible winter. It would teach them secrets about warmth, comfort, and human ingenuity that most people today have completely forgotten. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to bring you more of these incredible historical mysteries. Chapter 3: Secrets of the Fire Masters. Ayla spent the first week in the caves doing something that puzzled everyone. Instead of immediately setting up their sleeping areas or organizing food storage, She sat quietly in different chambers, just listening. "What are you listening for, grandmother?" young Zara asked. "The caves are trying to teach us," Ayla replied. "But first, we have to learn their language." This might sound mystical, but what Ayla was doing was actually incredibly scientific. She was learning to read the air currents, the temperature variations, the acoustic properties of each chamber. She was figuring out how the previous inhabitants had turned a natural cave system into a sophisticated heating and ventilation network. What she discovered challenged everything her tribe thought they knew about making fire and staying warm. The previous inhabitants hadn't relied primarily on wood fires like Ayla's people did. Instead, they had developed a complex system of heat management that was far more efficient and sustainable than anything modern survival experts had imagined possible. Here's how it worked, and this is where it gets really controversial among scientists today. The caves had natural hot springs deep underground, but instead of just using these springs directly, the previous inhabitants had carved channels and designed stone arrangements that captured and directed the heat throughout the entire cave system. They had essentially created the world's first central heating system, thousands of years before such systems were supposed to exist. But that was just the beginning. They had also developed techniques for storing heat in specially designed stone formations during the day, then releasing it slowly at night. They'd created insulation systems using animal furs and natural materials that were more effective than modern sleeping bags. They'd even developed methods for cooking food using nothing but the natural heat from the caves. The most controversial discovery was a series of stone chambers that seemed designed for something scientists call thermal meditation. These were spaces where people could lie down and be surrounded by perfectly controlled warm air currents. The temperature, humidity, and even air movement were precisely regulated to create optimal conditions for deep restorative sleep. Some researchers believe these chambers were so advanced that they could induce specific brainwave states associated with healing and recovery. Others think that's impossible for prehistoric people to have understood. The debate continues to this day, but Ayla didn't care about scientific debates. She cared about keeping her family alive, and as she learned to use these techniques, she realized something incredible. Her family wasn't just surviving the impossible winter, they were thriving. They were sleeping better than they ever had. They had endless warm water for drinking and cleaning. They were eating better because the controlled heat allowed them to prepare food in ways they had never imagined. Most importantly, they were using far less energy to stay warm, which meant they could use their strength for other things, like developing new tools, creating art, and most surprisingly teaching each other skills that no one in their tribe had ever learned before. Yorick discovered he had a talent for carving intricate tools when his hands weren't constantly numb from cold. Kira became an expert at preparing and preserving food using the controlled heat systems. Young Zara, with the endless curiosity of a child, began experimenting with the cave's acoustics and discovered that certain chambers could amplify sound in extraordinary ways. But the most important discovery came from Ayla herself. As she mastered the cave's heating systems, she realized that the key to staying warm wasn't just generating heat. It was understanding how to manage, store, and distribute heat efficiently. This principle would prove crucial because halfway through that impossible winter, something happened that would test all their new knowledge to its absolute limits. Are you starting to see why modern survival experts are so fascinated by these techniques? Wait until you hear what happened next. Chapter 4: The Controversial Survival Method. Halfway through the impossible winter, disaster struck. A massive avalanche sealed the main entrance to the caves. Ayla's family was trapped underground with no way to hunt for fresh food and no access to wood for traditional fires. Any other group would have panicked. They would have probably died within weeks. But Ayla's family had learned something that most survival experts today find hard to believe. They'd learned to survive almost entirely without traditional fire. This is where the story becomes really controversial. Most survival training focuses on fire making as the absolute foundation of staying alive in cold conditions. Fire for warmth, fire for cooking, fire for light, fire for protection. The idea of surviving an Arctic winter without fire seems impossible, but the previous cave inhabitants had developed techniques that went far beyond traditional fire use. They had learned to harness and multiply heat sources that most people would never even notice. Here's what Ayla's family discovered, and why some scientists still argue about whether this was actually possible. First, they learned to use their own body heat far more efficiently than anyone thought possible. By understanding air currents and insulation principles, they could create microclimates around their bodies that amplified their natural warmth by what researchers estimate was 300 to 400%. They created sleeping systems using the cave's natural materials that were so effective at heat retention that one person's body heat could warm an entire sleeping area for multiple people. They developed breathing techniques that helped their bodies generate and conserve more heat. They even learned to use the heat generated by food digestion to warm their sleeping spaces. But the most controversial technique was what researchers now call communal heat amplification. This involved precise positioning of family members in specific geometric patterns that created air circulation systems around their bodies. The warm air from one person would be channeled to warm the next person, who would then channel their combined warmth to the next, and so on. Some scientists say this is impossible. Others point to modern research on group hypothermia prevention that suggests similar techniques might actually work. But whether scientists believe it or not, Ayla's family was living proof that it worked. Even without access to wood for fires, even trapped underground for months, they stayed warm, healthy, and comfortable. The most shocking part? They weren't just surviving. They were discovering things about human potential that wouldn't be rediscovered by science for thousands of years. Young Zara, for example, discovered that certain breathing patterns could make her hands warm enough to work with small tools, even in very cold areas of the caves. Yorick learned to read air temperature changes so precisely that he could predict weather patterns days in advance, even from deep underground. Kira developed techniques for food preparation that used minimal heat but created meals that were more nutritious and satisfying than anything they had eaten before. And Ayla was learning to understand the human body's relationship with cold in ways that challenged everything her culture believed about survival. She discovered that fighting the cold was actually less effective than working with it, that the human body could adapt to cold temperatures far better than anyone imagined if you knew the right techniques. That warmth wasn't just about external heat sources, but about understanding how to optimize the heat your body was already producing. These discoveries were so far ahead of their time that when anthropologists first analyzed them, many refused to believe the evidence. How could a prehistoric people understand principles of thermodynamics that wouldn't be formally discovered until the 18th century? But here's what makes it even more controversial. Some researchers believe that Ayla's family wasn't just rediscovering techniques from the previous cave inhabitants. They believe they were developing completely new survival methods that were actually superior to anything that had been tried before. If that's true, it means that during the worst winter in human history, trapped underground with minimal resources, an ordinary prehistoric family made breakthrough discoveries about human survival that we're only beginning to understand today. And those discoveries were about to be tested in the most extreme way possible. Chapter 5. When everything went wrong, 3 months into being trapped underground, Ayla woke up to something that filled her with terror. Silence. For months, they had grown accustomed to the constant sound of the underground hot springs that heated their cave system, The gentle bubbling, the soft hiss of steam, the quiet flow of warm water through the stone channels. These sounds had become like a heartbeat, the rhythm that assured them their heat source was still working. But now, there was only silence. Yorick was the first to investigate. What he found confirmed their worst fears. The hot springs had stopped flowing, whether due to seismic activity from the avalanche or some other underground shift. Their primary heat source was gone. The temperature in the caves began dropping immediately. Within hours, their breath was visible in the air. Within a day, ice began forming near the sealed entrance. Within 3 days, the caves were almost as cold as the outside world. Most survival experts would say this was the end. No heat source, no way to get outside, limited food supplies, and outside temperatures that hadn't risen above deadly levels in months. There was no way to survive. But Ayla had been preparing for this possibility without even realizing it. All those weeks of learning to manage heat efficiently, of understanding how their bodies generated and conserved warmth, of mastering the cave's air circulation systems, had taught her something crucial. They didn't need the hot springs to survive. They had learned to become their own heating system. What happened next challenges everything we think we know about human limits in extreme cold. Ayla reorganized their living space using principles she had learned from studying the cave's design. She created a central area where all 4 family members would sleep together, but not randomly. Each person was positioned to maximize heat sharing while ensuring proper air circulation. She designed their sleeping arrangements so that the warm air exhaled by one person would flow across the body of the next person before being channeled back through their improvised ventilation system. She used the cave's natural stone formations to create heat reflection surfaces that amplified their body warmth. Most importantly, she implemented a 24-hour warming schedule where family members took turns doing specific physical exercises designed to generate heat that would benefit the entire group. But the most controversial part of their survival strategy was what Ayla called heat meditation. This was a technique where family members would enter focused mental states that seemed to actually increase their body temperature. Modern science has documented similar techniques used by Tibetan monks who can raise their body temperature enough to dry wet sheets with their skin, even in freezing conditions. But the idea that a prehistoric grandmother could have developed similar techniques independently seems impossible to many researchers. Yet that's exactly what the evidence suggests happened. Zara, being the smallest and most vulnerable to cold, was taught to visualize internal fire that would spread warmth throughout her body. Yorick learned breathing patterns that increased blood circulation to his extremities. Kira developed meditation techniques that helped her maintain warm skin temperature even during the coldest periods. And it worked. Even without their external heat source, even trapped in what had become essentially an underground icebox, they maintained body temperatures high enough not just to survive, but to remain active and healthy. But the most shocking discovery came 3 weeks later when they realized something incredible. They weren't just surviving the loss of their heat source, they had actually improved their survival techniques. The crisis had forced them to develop methods that were more efficient, more sustainable, and more adaptable than anything they'd used before. They were living proof that humans could adapt to extreme conditions far beyond what anyone thought possible. They were demonstrating survival capabilities that mainstream science insisted couldn't exist. And they were about to make a discovery that would be even more controversial. Make sure you're subscribed because the next part of this story involves archaeological findings that some scientists still refuse to accept as real. Chapter 6: The Ancient Knowledge Debate. 2 months after losing their heat source, while exploring the deepest chambers of the cave system, Zara made a discovery that would puzzle scientists for decades. Hidden behind a carefully constructed stone wall she found a chamber filled with what could only be described as a prehistoric library. Carved stone tablets covered with intricate symbols, detailed drawings showing human anatomy with precision that wouldn't be matched until the Renaissance, star charts that accurately mapped constellations, and most controversially, detailed instructions for survival techniques that seemed impossibly advanced for the time period. When archaeologists eventually studied these tablets, they discovered something that split the scientific community into two camps that are still arguing today. The tablets contain detailed descriptions of the exact survival techniques that Ayla's family had been discovering through trial and error. Techniques for managing body heat, for creating efficient air circulation systems, for preserving food without external heat sources, even for those controversial heat meditation practices. But here's what made it really controversial. Carbon dating showed that these tablets were at least 5,000 years older than Ayla's time. That meant some unknown group of people had developed these advanced survival techniques millennia before Ayla's family arrived at the caves. One group of scientists believes this proves the existence of a lost prehistoric civilization with knowledge far more advanced than we've ever imagined. They point to the sophisticated understanding of human physiology, the accurate astronomical observations, and the complex engineering principles shown in the cave modifications. The other group insists this is impossible. They argue that prehistoric humans simply didn't have the cognitive development necessary for such advanced knowledge. They suggest the tablets must be more recent than the carbon dating indicates, or that the techniques described are being misinterpreted by modern researchers. But Ayla's family didn't care about scientific debates. They cared about the practical knowledge they were discovering in these tablets. The tablets described techniques they hadn't yet tried. Methods for purifying water using natural cave minerals. Ways to preserve meat for months without any external heat source. Exercises that could maintain muscle strength and circulation even during periods of minimal activity. Most intriguingly, the tablets describe something called winter consciousness, a mental state that supposedly allowed people to reduce their metabolic needs while maintaining full cognitive function during extreme cold periods. Modern sleep researchers have documented similar states in hibernating animals, but the idea that humans could consciously induce a similar condition challenges fundamental assumptions about human physiology. Yet as Ayla's family experimented with the techniques described in the tablets, they found that they could indeed enter states of consciousness that dramatically reduced their caloric needs while keeping their minds sharp and alert. Zara, being youngest and most adaptable, became particularly skilled at these techniques. She could slow her breathing and heart rate to levels that would normally indicate unconsciousness, while remaining fully aware of her surroundings and able to communicate normally. This ability proved crucial because their food supplies were running dangerously low, and their reduced metabolic states meant they could maintain their health on much smaller amounts of food. But the tablets described something even more controversial. They suggested that during periods of extreme environmental stress, humans could develop what the symbols seem to describe as enhanced sensory awareness. According to the tablets, people who mastered the winter consciousness techniques could develop almost supernatural abilities to sense changes in their environment. They could detect temperature variations too small for normal perception. They could sense air movement patterns that would predict weather changes days in advance. They could even sense the emotional and physical states of other people through subtle environmental cues. Most scientists dismiss these claims as primitive superstition, but Ayla's family was experiencing something that seemed to match these descriptions exactly. Yorick developed an uncanny ability to predict changes in the cave's air pressure that preceded shifts in outside weather conditions. Kira became extraordinarily sensitive to the health and emotional states of other family members, often knowing when someone needed help before they realized it themselves. Most remarkably, Ayla seemed to develop an intuitive understanding of the cave system that went far beyond anything normal observation could explain. She could sense areas where the stone was unstable, predict where new water sources might emerge, and even anticipate how changes in outside conditions would affect their underground environment. Were these abilities real, or were they just the result of heightened attention during a survival crisis? The debate continues among researchers today, but what's undeniable is that these supposed abilities helped Ayla's family survive conditions that should have been impossible to endure, and they were about to need every advantage they could get, because the impossible winter was about to become even more impossible. Chapter 7: Mysteries Science Can't Explain. 6 months into their underground survival, something happened that defies scientific explanation even today. Ayla woke up one morning with a knowledge she shouldn't have possessed. Detailed, accurate knowledge about the world outside their cave that she had no way of obtaining. She knew that the avalanche blocking their entrance had partially cleared. She knew that 3 other human tribes were camped within a day's journey of their location. Most mysteriously, she knew exactly where to find specific types of food and materials they desperately needed. When she shared this information with her family, they were skeptical. How could she possibly know these things? They'd been sealed underground for months with no contact with the outside world. But Ayla was insistent. She described the outside landscape in detail, including changes that had occurred since they'd been trapped. She drew maps showing the locations of the other tribes and the best routes to reach them. She even predicted weather patterns for the following weeks. Yorick thought she might be hallucinating from stress or malnutrition. Kira worried that the extended isolation was affecting her mother's mind. But Zara, with the open curiosity of a child, asked a simple question that changed everything. "How do you know these things, grandmother?" Ayla's answer was something that still puzzles researchers today. She said she had learned to listen to the mountain's dreams. This sounds like mystical nonsense, but modern scientists have discovered something intriguing. The cave system where Ayla's family was trapped sits on top of a complex network of underground water flows and mineral deposits that create subtle electromagnetic fields. Some researchers believe these fields might have affected the family's neural activity in ways that enhanced their pattern recognition abilities and intuitive processing. Others think the prolonged exposure to the cave's unique acoustic properties might have induced altered states of consciousness that expanded their perceptual abilities. But the most controversial theory is that Ayla's family had learned to consciously access what some scientists call quantum consciousness, the idea that human awareness can tap into information fields that exist beyond normal sensory perception. Most mainstream scientists dismiss this as pseudoscience, but the accuracy of Ayla's predictions was undeniable. When they finally managed to dig through the partially cleared avalanche debris and emerge from the caves, they found that every detail Ayla had described was exactly correct. The landscape and the weather, the locations of other tribes, everything matched her mysterious knowledge perfectly. The other tribes they encountered were amazed, not just that Ayla's family had survived, but that they appeared healthier and more capable than they had been before the impossible winter began. Word of their survival spread quickly among the scattered human populations. People travelled great distances just to learn their techniques. The knowledge Ayla's family had gained became the foundation for survival methods that helped other groups endure the remaining years of the Ice Age. But here's what makes their story even more mysterious. Many of the techniques they taught seemed to work differently for different people. Some individuals could master the heat meditation methods easily, while others found them impossible. Some people developed the enhanced sensory awareness, while others experienced no change at all. It was as if the techniques worked only for people who were somehow prepared to receive them, as if there were hidden factors that determined who could access these enhanced survival abilities. Modern researchers have found similar patterns in studies of extreme survival situations. Some people seem to naturally develop extraordinary capabilities under stress, while others maintain only normal human limits even in the most challenging conditions. What determines the difference? Scientists still don't know, but they do know that Ayla's family represented something unprecedented in the archaeological record. A group of ordinary people who, when faced with impossible circumstances, developed capabilities that expanded the known limits of human potential. And their influence didn't end with their own survival. The techniques they developed and taught became part of the collective knowledge that helped humanity survive the Ice Age and eventually thrive in environments all over the planet. But the most shocking part of their story was still to come. I hope you're finding this as fascinating as I am. If you are, please consider sharing this video with someone who loves mystery and history. Stories like this deserve to be heard. Chapter 8. The Final Test. Spring finally came to the impossible winter, but it brought a challenge that nobody expected. As the ice began to melt and the world started to warm, Ayla's family faced a choice that would determine not just their own future, but the future of human knowledge itself. Other tribes were begging them to stay and teach their survival techniques. Leaders from groups scattered across the continent were offering them positions of honor, resources, and comfort in exchange for their knowledge. It would have been easy to accept. After surviving the harshest conditions in human history, they had earned the right to live in comfort and be honored as the heroes they were. But the ancient tablets in the cave had revealed something that changed everything. The tablets suggested that the advanced survival knowledge they contained was part of a larger system of human development. The winter survival techniques were just the beginning. There were other chambers, other caves, other hidden repositories of knowledge scattered across the world. According to the tablets, the people who had originally developed these techniques hadn't been trying just to survive harsh conditions. They'd been trying to unlock the full potential of human consciousness and capability. The winter survival techniques were just the first level of a much larger curriculum. Ayla realized that staying with any one tribe, no matter how honored and comfortable their position, would mean abandoning the possibility of discovering this larger knowledge system. So they made a decision that shocked everyone who knew them. Instead of settling down to enjoy the rewards of their survival, they decided to continue their journey. They would travel to other locations mentioned in the tablets. They would search for other repositories of this ancient knowledge. They would continue to develop and test the limits of human potential. It was a decision that required incredible courage. They were leaving behind safety, comfort, and certainty to pursue something that might not even exist. But it was also a decision that would have profound implications for human development. Over the following years, Ayla's family became legendary among the scattered human populations. Stories spread of their abilities, their knowledge, and their willingness to share what they learned with anyone who was genuinely interested in developing their own capabilities. They established a network of knowledge sharing that connected human groups across vast distances. They developed teaching methods that helped others access the same extraordinary abilities they had discovered. Most importantly, they proved that the limits most people accepted as fixed aspects of human nature were actually just starting points for much greater possibilities. Young Zara grew up to become one of the most accomplished teachers of these techniques. She developed new methods for helping people access enhanced states of consciousness and expanded perceptual abilities. Yorick became an expert at identifying locations with the geological properties that supported the development of these abilities. He helped establish new learning centers in caves and natural formations around the world. Kira specialized in the practical applications of the techniques, developing new methods for food preparation, medicine, and tool-making that incorporated the principles they had learned. And Ayla became something like the world's first university professor, traveling constantly to share knowledge and learn from others who were developing similar capabilities. But their greatest accomplishment wasn't any specific technique or ability they developed. It was proving that humans were capable of far more than anyone had imagined. They demonstrated that when people are willing to push beyond accepted limits, when they're willing to learn from crisis and challenge, when they're willing to work together and share knowledge freely, there are virtually no limits to what becomes possible. The techniques they developed during that impossible winter became the foundation for advances in human capability that influenced everything from medicine to technology to social organization for thousands of years afterward. And according to some researchers, their influence continues today. Chapter 9. What They Never Told You. Here's what most history books don't tell you about Ayla's family and their survival techniques. Their story didn't end with the Ice Age. It continued to influence human development in ways that most people never learned about. The network of knowledge centers they established became the foundation for what some historians believe were the world's first universities. Places where people gathered not just to learn survival techniques, but to explore the full range of human potential. These centers preserved and developed the techniques Ayla's family had discovered, but they also expanded them into areas that sound almost like science fiction when described today. According to fragmentary records found at archaeological sites around the world, the people trained in these techniques developed abilities that challenge our assumptions about human limitations. They could enter mental states that dramatically slowed aging processes. They developed techniques for healing injuries and illnesses that wouldn't be matched by conventional medicine for thousands of years. They created methods of communication that allowed them to share complex information across great distances without any technology. Most controversially, some records suggest they developed techniques for accessing and preserving knowledge in ways that allowed information to be passed directly from one generation to the next without traditional learning processes. Mainstream historians dismiss most of these claims as mythology or exaggeration. But the consistency of similar reports from widely separated archaeological sites suggests there might be more truth to these stories than most scholars are comfortable admitting. What's undeniable is that many of the techniques Ayla's family discovered during their underground survival continue to influence human development today, though most people don't realize it. Modern breathing techniques used in meditation and yoga include methods that are virtually identical to the heat generation practices Ayla's family developed. Current research into the effects of controlled hypothermia on healing and longevity is exploring principles that these ancient practitioners seem to have understood intuitively. Even modern team building and cooperation techniques used in everything from military training to corporate development include elements that mirror the group survival methods Ayla's family perfected. But perhaps the most important legacy of their story isn't any specific technique. It's the proof that human beings are capable of adapting, learning, and growing far beyond what most people believe is possible. During the impossible winter, when every reasonable prediction said they should die, Ayla's family not only survived, but discovered capabilities that expanded the known limits of human potential. They proved that crisis and challenge, when met with curiosity and cooperation rather than fear and competition, can become opportunities for breakthrough discoveries. They demonstrated that ordinary people, when they're willing to think beyond conventional limitations, can accomplish extraordinary things. Most importantly, they showed that human beings have far more potential than most of us ever realize. The techniques they developed weren't superhuman abilities. They were natural human capabilities that most people simply never learn to access. And that leads to an interesting question. If people 30,000 years ago could develop such remarkable abilities using nothing but curiosity, determination, and cooperation, what might be possible for people today who have access to modern knowledge and technology? Some researchers believe we're just beginning to rediscover capabilities that our ancestors took for granted. Others think we're on the verge of breakthrough discoveries that will expand human potential in ways we can't even imagine. But one thing is certain. The story of Ayla's family proves that the limits we accept as fixed aspects of human nature might actually be just the starting point for much greater possibilities. And speaking of sleep and rest, if you want to experience some of the deep restorative sleep techniques that these ancient people developed, remember to check out that guide I mentioned earlier. The link is in the description. Chapter 10. The Legacy That Still Lives. So what happened to the knowledge that Ayla's family discovered? Where did it go? And why don't we learn about these techniques in school? The answer involves one of the most controversial debates in anthropology today. According to some researchers, the knowledge never disappeared. It went underground, literally and figuratively, preserved by small groups of people who continue to develop and practice these techniques throughout history. They point to mysterious references in ancient texts from cultures around the world. Egyptian papyri that describe techniques for inner fire that match Ayla's heat generation methods. Tibetan manuscripts that outline practices for surviving extreme cold that are virtually identical to the family's group warming techniques. Native American oral traditions that preserve detailed knowledge of consciousness-altering practices that mirror the winter consciousness states described in the cave tablets. Some historians believe that what we call lost civilizations weren't actually lost. They think these were groups of people who had preserved and continued to develop the advanced knowledge that originated with discoveries like those made by Ayla's family. Other researchers disagree completely. They argue that the similarities between these various traditions are just coincidences, and that the idea of a continuous underground preservation of ancient knowledge is fantasy rather than history. But here's what makes this debate particularly interesting. Modern science is beginning to validate many of the techniques that were supposedly developed by these ancient practitioners. Research into controlled hypothermia shows that humans can indeed survive much colder temperatures than previously thought possible if they use the right techniques. Studies of group meditation demonstrate that people can collectively generate measurable increases in local temperature through focused mental practices. Investigations into advanced breathing techniques have documented cases of people who can consciously control their autonomic nervous system in ways that allow them to function normally in extreme conditions that would incapacitate most individuals. Most significantly, research into what scientists call non-local consciousness has found evidence suggesting that human awareness might indeed be able to access information through means that go beyond normal sensory perception. All of these findings support the possibility that the techniques described in Ayla's story might actually work exactly as the ancient records suggest. But whether the knowledge was preserved continuously or rediscovered independently, one thing is clear. The human capabilities that Ayla's family developed during their survival crisis represent possibilities that still exist for people today. The question is whether we have the curiosity, determination, and willingness to cooperate that it takes to develop them. In our modern world, we rarely face survival crises as extreme as the impossible winter. But we do face challenges that require us to expand beyond our assumed limitations. Climate change, resource scarcity, social conflict, technological disruption. All of these challenges might be opportunities to discover capabilities we didn't know we had. The story of Ayla's family suggests that human beings are far more adaptable, creative, and capable than most of us realize. When faced with impossible circumstances, when everything seems hopeless, when all conventional solutions have failed, we might find that we have access to abilities and knowledge that we never knew existed. Their legacy isn't just the specific techniques they developed. It's the proof that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when they're willing to think beyond conventional limits and work together toward common goals. As you drift off to sleep tonight, surrounded by the warmth and comfort that modern technology provides, remember that this comfort exists because thousands of years ago, a small family trapped underground during the harshest winter in history refused to give up. They chose curiosity over fear, cooperation over competition, and growth over mere survival. And in doing so, they discovered capabilities that helped ensure the survival and development of our entire species. Their warmth still lives in every heated home, every comfortable bed, every technology that helps us thrive in challenging environments. But more than that, Their spirit of discovery and their faith in human potential still lives in everyone who refuses to accept limitations as permanent, who sees challenges as opportunities, and who believes that we're capable of far more than we've yet discovered. That spirit, that warmth, that unshakable belief in human possibility, that's the real legacy of the impossible winter. And it's still burning bright, waiting for each of us to discover it within ourselves. Sweet dreams. Before you go, make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed this journey into one of history's most remarkable survival stories. And drop a comment letting me know what surprised you most about Ayla's family and their incredible discoveries. I read every comment, and I love hearing your thoughts about these deep dives into the mysteries of human potential and our fascinating past. Until next time, remember, you're capable of far more than you know.